It was only when Emma whispered in my ear about the missing badge that I realized the man in front of us was lying. Before that, it was just this hard knot in my chest. He had the green shirt, a radio on his belt, that calm park employee voice. I stared at his chest, waiting for my brain to catch up. Then his tone flipped from friendly to sharp, and he said we needed to pack up and go with him to the ranger office, about 3 miles up that spur. He pointed at a narrow side trail I hadn't even noticed. My stomach dropped. It was midday, but the idea of leaving the main trail with him made my skin crawl. Emma leaned in and breathed. He doesn't have a badge. That's when everything finally clicked. But I should back up. Friday morning, my best friend Emma, my boyfriend Tyler and I stuffed our backpacks into Tyler's car and drove to a trailhead on the Appalachian Trail in western North Carolina. We'd been talking about a 2-day trip for weeks. Tyler found a 12-mile loop with a waterfall and made it his project, checking water and mileage like he was our guide. Emma and I rolled our eyes, but we let him. We got our permits through the state app, saved them offline, and took screenshots. Emma suggested printing them too, but my printer was dead, and the app said digital was valid, so we didn't bother. We left late morning, grabbed fast food, and hit the trail around noon. The first day was boring in how well it went. Good weather, clear blazes, steady climbing, no twisted ankles. By late afternoon, we reached a campsite by a creek Tyler had picked, with 2 flat spots and an old fire ring, and no one else around. We set up the tents, filtered water, and cooked freeze-dried dinners. We hung the food, glanced at the map, and went to bed before it was fully dark. We were up with first light on Saturday. We choked down instant coffee and oatmeal, kicked dirt over the cold ashes, and broke camp. Emma did her out-loud checklist. Phone, meds, headlamp, permit. Tyler checked the route on his phone again. The plan was simple. Hike the last 4 miles, stop for lunch somewhere pretty, then finish the loop and be back at the car before dark. The trail rolled more than it climbed. We passed 2 older guys with trekking poles and a trail runner who nodded once and vanished. Around noon, we came to a grassy opening just off the trail. Nothing special. A flat patch with a big rock and 2 logs pulled together like a bench. Emma called it for lunch and dropped her pack before either of us answered. She pulled out her stove and started boiling water for instant soup. I dug cheese and crackers out of my bag and spread them on the rock. Tyler stayed on the trail, staring at the map on his phone and mumbling about elevation like anyone cared. That's when I heard steady footsteps coming around the bend behind him. One person. A man walked into view in a light green button-up, dark green pants, a radio on his belt, faded cap on his head. If you'd shown me a photo right then, I would have said Forest Service without thinking. He stepped off the trail toward us like we were already his problem. "Afternoon," he said. "I'm Dan Miller with the Forest Service, doing permit checks on this section today." His voice sounded relaxed, but it had that practiced authority, like when a cop calls something routine. Tyler lit up like this was totally normal. "Oh yeah, no problem," he said, already pulling his phone out. "We've got the permits in the app." He held the screen out so the guy could see our names and dates. The man barely glanced at it before his mouth tightened. He shook his head once, slow. "Yeah, that's not going to work," he said, looking between the 3 of us. "On this section, digital permits aren't accepted. You're required to have printed paper copies with you." We all looked at each other, because when we bought the permits, the instructions clearly said showing them on your phone was enough. Emma started, "The website says digital is valid, But he cut her off with a tight little smile. He said ignorance didn't exempt us from regulations, and we needed to come with him right now to the ranger office, about 3 miles that way, to get everything fixed, or we'd be facing a fine. He said it in that rehearsed official voice, But he was standing too close, angled so he was between us and the main trail. He still hadn't offered to show any ID. The radio on his belt looked old and beat up. He never touched it. Emma leaned in so close her mouth was at my ear and whispered, "He doesn't have a name badge." My chest went cold. I looked at his shirt and saw it. No plastic badge, no embroidered name, just blank fabric. Once I noticed that, everything else felt wrong. The shirt fit a little off, like it wasn't really his. The patch on the sleeve looked crooked. His boots were just generic work boots, not anything like a uniform. He kept repeating that we were non-compliant and that voluntary cooperation would look better. But when Tyler quietly asked what regulation we were violating, the man dodged it and just said we needed to move. Tyler's shoulders were tense while he pretended to scroll through the permit app. I knew he was seeing the same line I remembered about digital proof being accepted. My fingers felt numb around the crackers I was still holding. It hit me that it was just the four of us out there and no one else in sight. Tyler straightened to his full height and took a half step closer, not aggressive, just solid. "We'll go to the ranger office ourselves after we eat," he said. "We're not going anywhere right this second." The man's face darkened like a switch flipped. The friendly thing dropped. "No," he said lower. "You're coming with me now. This isn't a request." The way he said "now" made my stomach twist. Emma's hand shook a little as she turned off the stove. She stood up and moved next to me without looking away from him. I got up too, and without planning it, we ended up shoulder to shoulder, the three of us forming this small wall between him and our stuff. Tyler crossed his arms over his chest. "We're not going with you," he said. "If there's a problem, we'll call the Forest Service and talk to them ourselves, right here." He nodded at the man's radio. "You can call it in too, can't you?" The guy stared at him for a few long seconds. His jaw flexed like he was grinding his teeth. For a moment, I was sure he was going to step toward us or reach for something, and my legs were already half ready to run. Instead, he suddenly spun around and walked back down the trail the way he'd come, fast and stiff. No goodbye, no "see you at the office," nothing. He never looked back once. We stayed where we were until the trees hit him. Then Emma grabbed her phone with both hands and said, "I'm calling right now." Her voice shook. She dug up the Forest Service number from the permit confirmation email and put the call on speaker. When the dispatcher answered, Emma went through everything. His name, the way he looked, what he'd said. The woman on the phone went quiet, then told us there were no inspections scheduled on that section today. She said every real officer had to wear a visible photo badge and that digital permits were fully valid. She told us that if he came back, we were not to go anywhere with him, to stay on the main trail, and to call 911 if we felt unsafe. Tyler had gone pale while she talked. As soon as the call ended, he started stuffing gear into his pack in this rushed, clumsy way he never does. I swept the cheese and crackers into a bag without caring that half of them were broken. Emma just said, "I'm done. I want to go back." And neither of us argued. We kicked dirt over the bare patch where the stove had been, yanked our packs on, and headed back the way we'd come instead of finishing the loop, every few minutes glancing over our shoulders as we hurried toward the start of the trail. There's a photo on my phone that cost me 3 weeks of sleepless nights and a permanent feeling that someone's watching me. But let me back up. My name's Alex. I live just outside Portland. I do graphic design, and my idea of outdoorsy is a daytime hike with a sandwich in my pack, not anything hardcore. My best friend Jen is a biologist at Portland State, and she'd been talking for weeks about this trail in the mountains east of the city, where some rare moss supposedly grew. We planned a Sunday hike, nothing crazy, just a 10-mile loop that should have taken about 5 hours. We left the trailhead parking lot around 9 with sandwiches and coffee in our packs. Weather was good, trail was clear, and the first couple hours were exactly what you'd expect. Trees, birds, gossip about her department. We didn't see anyone else, which was weird for a Sunday, but we figured we'd just picked a less popular loop. Around mile 4, the trail split, and we took the left fork, even though it wasn't marked on Jen's map. She guessed it was an old hunting path that rejoined the loop. I remember saying that was the kind of thing people regretted later, but I still followed her. After about 30 minutes, the trees got denser, and the path shrank to a faint line through the undergrowth. It felt less like a trail and more like someone's memory of one. I started checking my watch and told Jen we should probably turn back while it was easy to retrace our steps. She pointed at a brighter patch through the trees and said there was a clearing just ahead, and she wanted to at least see it. She sounded confident, not reckless, and we weren't exactly bushwhacking, so I went along. We stepped into a small meadow and just stopped. 3 military-style tents in dull green, 2 generators under camouflage netting, and several metal containers with bright yellow biohazard symbols were set up in a neat cluster. The whole thing was low and tucked under the tree line, easy to miss from above but obvious from where we stood. No people, no vehicles, just the soft hum of the generators. Jen's whole body went rigid. She grabbed my arm and whispered that yellow symbols like that meant high biosafety levels, stuff that shouldn't be sitting in open forest without serious procedures. I said maybe it was some official CDC project or Forest Service thing. She shook her head immediately. No warning signs, no fencing, no posted permits. She works with this kind of stuff. She wasn't guessing. By the time she finished saying that, I'd already pulled out my phone. It was automatic. I snapped photos of the containers, the tents, the serial number plate on one of the generators. I didn't even think about why, just, this looks wrong, document it. Jen hissed at me to stop, said if this was anything sensitive and someone caught us taking pictures, we could get dragged into something we didn't understand. Then she said, flat out this was not a legal university station or normal Forest Service site, and we had no idea what was inside those containers. That finally cut through the "this is interesting" feeling and replaced it with, "we need to leave right now." I shoved my phone in my pocket and we backed out the way we'd come, careful not to step on any gear. As soon as the trees blocked the clearing, we sped up. Neither of us talked. When we hit the marked trail again, I felt a big wave of relief, but we didn't take the break we'd planned. We just walked faster and kept glancing over our shoulders. A few minutes later, Jen tried calling her research supervisor to explain what we'd seen, but the call kept dropping after a few seconds. I heard her get as far as, "we stumbled on some tents and biohazard containers," and then the connection cut. After the 3rd try, she swore, shoved her phone away, and said she'd call from the car where the signal was better. We kept moving. The whole mood of the hike was different now. Every branch snapping behind us made me turn around. About an hour after we'd left that meadow, I heard real footsteps coming up fast behind us, heavy even, definitely a person. I looked back and saw a man, maybe 40, in regular hiking clothes closing the distance. No pack, no water bottle, and he wasn't breathing hard at all. He slowed and stopped about 10 feet away, gave us a quick friendly smile and said, "Hey, I'm Dave with the Forest Service," while flashing a badge so fast I couldn't read it. Then he asked if we'd seen anything unusual on the trail today. Illegal camps, dumping, anything like that. Jen answered before I could, said no, just normal trail stuff. We were doing the loop and heading back to the parking lot. He nodded like that was fine. Then instead of passing us, he fell into step beside us. That set off every alarm in my head. He started asking where we were from, how often we hiked out there, what we did for work. When Jen mentioned the university, his eyes flicked to her pack, then to mine, and stayed there a little too long. Then he asked if we'd taken any photos during our hike, said they sometimes used visitor photos to check trail damage. My stomach flipped. I lied and told him no, my phone was dead. He looked straight at me and said he had a power bank and I should let him see it. I told him no, it was a personal device and I didn't want to mess with it out here. His face went hard, all the fake friendliness gone, and he stopped walking. We stopped too. Then he stepped closer, lowered his voice, and straight up demanded I delete any photos taken in the last hour, called it a matter of national security. Jen didn't freak out. She squared her shoulders and asked him where his service vehicle was and why he was alone if this was official Forest Service business. He watched her for a beat like he was weighing something, then his face went blank. "You've been advised," he said. "Do the right thing." Then he stepped off the side of the trail and let us walk past. We didn't talk about it. We just picked up the pace. After half a minute, I heard his boots behind us again. When I glanced back, he was about 15 feet away, matching our speed, hands in his pockets like this was normal. Jen muttered, "Do not stop." Parking lot, then other people. I tried to act casual and raised my phone like I was checking the time. The second he saw it, he pulled his own out and started openly taking pictures of us. I heard the fake shutter sound over and over. My hands were shaking so badly I shoved my phone into my pocket and left it there. The last stretch of trail felt longer than the whole hike. I kept my eyes on the dirt and just counted steps until the trees opened and I saw the glint of cars. The lot was almost empty, but even 2 other vehicles felt like safety. We headed straight for my car. Jen breathed. "He's still there. Don't look." He walked past us, then stopped behind my bumper. I heard his phone again, knew he was photographing my license plate, the back of the car, probably us getting in. I turned and told him he needed to stop because he was making us uncomfortable. He ignored me, stepped to the center of the lot, and just watched. My fingers slipped on the key fob twice before the doors finally unlocked. We got in, locked everything, and I started the engine. In the rear view, I saw him pull out a small notebook and write something while staring at us. I backed out and drove off the mountain without stopping once. Once we hit the main road, Jen told me to hand her my phone. Her voice had that clipped lab tone she uses when something is serious. She toggled off location. Then, while I drove, she backed the photos up to my email and to a cloud folder, then did the same with hers. "If anyone ever takes our phones, they don't get to erase this," she said. Hearing her say anyone like that scared me more than the hike. Jen is not dramatic. If she's spooked, there's a reason. We drove straight to my place and spent about an hour at my kitchen table with my laptop open. Jen searched Forest Service field labs, CDC field sites, anything with generators and biohazard containers. Everything official had permits, warning signs, people in clear gear. Nothing looked like 3 hidden tents in a random clearing with one guy in hiking clothes. We went in circles about calling anyone. Forest Service office, anonymous tip line, even campus security. Every version ended with that guy finding out who we were. Jen kept repeating, "He said national security. Either it's real and we shouldn't know, or it's fake, and he's still dangerous." We decided not to report it. 3 weeks later, Jen drove back alone and found the access road covered in no trespassing signs and a locked gate that hadn't been there. I keep our photos backed up in 3 places. I catch myself watching the cars behind me. I don't hike unmarked trails anymore. Ever. Last June, I was camping at this big campground in New Hampshire, probably 30 or 40 sites. I'd gone on an evening hike to see a waterfall and planned to be back before dark. But I got turned around on the way back, and only my phone flashlight helped me find the trail again. I got back to the campground around 11 at night. In the dark, all the tents looked the same, mostly green or blue dome-style tents. I was trying to remember landmarks, some bent tree, a big rock, and I thought I found my site. The tent looked exactly like mine. Same model, same color. I unzipped the entrance and started crawling in while pulling my backpack off my shoulders. Then I started unzipping my jacket. That's when someone screamed. The sound was right in front of my face, this full-on panic scream, and my brain just stalled. I jerked back, dropped my backpack halfway inside the tent, and fumbled for my phone. When I got the flashlight on and pointed it inside, I froze. There were two people in sleeping bags staring at me, a man and a woman. The woman was pressed back against her pillow, eyes huge, still yelling, "Who are you? Get out!" The guy was already twisting around, reaching for something near his head. Every "what the hell are you doing" scenario hit me at once. I scrambled backwards so fast I got tangled in the flap and fell on my ass in the dirt. I got up again with my hands out like I was being arrested. I'm sorry, I kept saying it. Wrong tent, I swear, I thought this was mine. The guy unzipped his bag in one motion and climbed out after me. He was maybe mid-30s, built, wearing just boxers, and he grabbed this big tactical flashlight like a baton. He shined it straight in my eyes and shouted, "What the hell are you doing getting in someone else's tent?" I squinted into the light and tried to explain without sounding like a creep. "I came back late. I got lost on the trail. My tent looks exactly like yours. I thought this was my site. I didn't see your car. I just recognized the tent." It sounded weaker out loud than it had in my head. From their side, all they knew was some random guy had started unzipping layers like he lived there. The woman had stopped screaming, but she was gripping her sleeping bag up to her chin, watching me like I might lunge at them. The guy didn't lower the flashlight. If anything, he stepped closer. "People don't just accidentally crawl into strangers' tents, man," he said. "You drunk?" I shook my head fast. "No, just stupid. Look, my car's further down. I was counting sites from the bathhouse. I must have miscounted. My tent is the same brand, same color, I swear." I kept my hands up where he could see them. My heartbeat was in my throat because I could already see this turning into the cops, a report, maybe worse. Behind him, the woman called, voice still shaky. "Do you have anything of ours?" It was a fair question. My backpack was lying half inside their tent, touching her legs. "That's my bag," I said. "You can go through it. I didn't touch your stuff. I literally opened the zipper and crawled in, that's it." The guy flicked the beam toward the bag, then back to me. I saw the moment he stopped seeing me as a guaranteed threat and downgraded me to possible idiot. He still didn't just let it go. "Show me your site," he said finally. "Right now. If you're lying, I'm calling the cops." I nodded hard. Honestly, I was relieved he hadn't just started swinging or screaming for help. "Yeah, okay. It's down the road, a little further," I said. He ducked back into their tent long enough to move something and say a few low words to his wife. She stayed sitting up, arms wrapped around herself. He handed my backpack out to me like it might explode. I put it on slowly, turning so my hands stayed visible. "Walk in front," he said. "Not fast. I'm right behind you." That was exactly what I would have done in his place, so I just said, "Okay," and started down the gravel road, lighting the ground with my phone so I wasn't waving a beam around near anyone else's tent. We passed a couple dark sites, and then my car came into view, and my actual tent next to it, same exact model as theirs. Seeing it there honestly made me feel sick and relieved at the same time. "That one," I said. My voice cracked a little. I unzipped it with shaking hands and flipped the flap open so he could see everything. My sleeping bag, my food bag, my lantern, my boots, the clothes I'd tossed in a corner. He stepped up beside me and swept his flashlight across my stuff like he was inspecting a crime scene. His face finally relaxed a notch. "Okay," he said, letting out a breath. "I see it. But Jesus Christ, man, you scared the shit out of us. My wife thought you were a robber or worse." I glanced back and saw her standing on the road now, arms still locked around herself, watching us from a distance with that same wide stare. "I'm really sorry," I said again. "I got back late, cut across instead of taking the road, saw your tent and just assumed. I shouldn't have done that. I get why you're freaked out." The reality of how it must have looked was sinking in while I stood there under his light like I was already in a mugshot. If some guy unzipped my tent at 11 at night and started coming in, I'd probably go for his throat too. It hit me that to them I wasn't some tired hiker. I was a potential threat who'd already crossed a line you're not supposed to cross when everyone's basically sleeping in thin nylon with their guard down. The guy sighed, still watching me like he'd remember my face forever. "We're calling the ranger, just to document this," he said. "No offense, but this is the kind of situation that needs to be on record." The ranger showed up about 20 minutes later in a white SUV, headlights cutting across the loop and lighting up my tent and theirs. The ranger walked over to me first, took my ID, and said in this calm voice, "All right, tell me what happened from the start." I gave him the same story I had already told the couple. Evening hike, got turned around, came back in the dark, rows of identical tents, miscounted, crawled into the wrong one. I said I never touched their stuff, never said anything threatening, and backed out as soon as I realized there were people inside. He asked if I had been drinking. I told him no, that I was camping alone and didn't drink when I needed to get myself off a trail. I heard the wife tell him I was inside their tent, taking my jacket off, and the way those words sounded made me feel sick. The husband told the ranger I had cooperated, walked them to my site, and handed over my ID without arguing. After a minute, the ranger waved me over and had us all walk together so he could look at both tents side by side. Standing there, it was pretty obvious how someone could screw it up. Same brand, same green dome, same little front area. The ranger shook his head and told them he could see it being a real mistake, then told the wife she had every right to scream. Then he asked if they wanted to file an official report or just have the incident written down in the campground records. The husband looked at his wife, then at me, and finally said they only wanted it documented, as long as I stayed away from their site. The ranger took down my address and phone number, checked my license again, wrote their information too, and said everything would be noted. Before he left, he looked straight at me and said, "You need to be more careful at night out here. People are nervous, and you could have been seriously hurt over this." When everyone finally went back to their tents, I sat inside mine with the light off and listened to every little sound in the campground. I barely slept. Every zipper, every footstep on gravel, made me think about that flashlight coming down on my head. In the morning, I walked to the camp store first thing and bought bright orange survey tape, then tied it all over my tent and guy lines until it was impossible to miss. I ended up packing a day early and leaving that afternoon, and I haven't planned a hike since then. That would have me walking back to camp after dark. The worst part, even now, is remembering her face when she realized some stranger was halfway into her tent. She was still shaking even after everyone knew it was a mistake. The husband had been 2 seconds from cracking my skull with that flashlight, and I honestly don't blame him for it at all. If somebody crawled into my tent at midnight and started undressing, I would probably react the same way or worse. When I checked out later, the ranger told me mix-ups like that happen more than people think at crowded campgrounds with look-alike tents, and usually they just end with yelling and embarrassment. Hearing that didn't really make me feel better. For weeks, I kept replaying that night and all the ways it could have gone bad if he'd swung first, or if they'd had a weapon close by there. I was 34 when I decided to do my first real solo hiking trip. Before that, I'd always gone backpacking with college friends, but after graduation we all scattered and could never line up our schedules. I picked a loop in the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas, moderate difficulty, about 15 miles with a few marked camping spots. I lived in Little Rock and had done plenty of hikes over the years, but always with people. This trip was supposed to be my test run, proof I could handle 3 days alone without anyone else to double-check my decisions. Mid-September seemed perfect once the worst of the heat passed. I packed and repacked my backpack all week, checked my gear list over and over, then finally loaded everything into my car and drove to the trailhead. The parking lot had a handful of cars and one old pickup, which actually made me feel better. Not crowded, but not the kind of empty lot where you start thinking about missing person posters. I signed the little trail register, hoisted my pack, took a deep breath that felt more like nerves than excitement, and started walking. The first day honestly felt great. I covered around 8 miles through mostly wooded terrain with a few steep climbs, stopping now and then to drink water and stare at the map longer than I needed to. I passed 2-day hikers going the other way, and later an older couple with trekking poles who asked where I was camping and told me to watch for storms. By late afternoon, I reached the marked camping area, picked a flat spot near a fallen log, and set up my tent. I made a freeze-dried dinner, hung my food, and went to bed feeling capable. Somewhere in the night, I woke up once or twice to random snaps and rustles outside, and automatically grabbed my phone even though I knew I had no service. The little screen lit up my tent and made me feel stupid and oddly young, like I was breaking a rule no one else cared about. Around 3, judging by the timestamp, I lay there staring at the fabric above me thinking, if something happens out here, it's just me. Not in a dramatic horror movie way, just a plain fact. Eventually the cold crept in again, and I fell back asleep. The second morning started early. I woke up at dawn from the chill in my sleeping bag, stretched, and opened my eyes, staring through the mesh wall of my tent at the trees. The light was that pale gray that means the sun is almost up but not quite. I was half asleep, mentally going through coffee, socks, boots, pack, when my brain finally registered that something was off. There was a shape that hadn't been there the night before. About 30 feet from my tent, just beyond the fire ring, a woman was standing perfectly still. She had on a dark hiking jacket, khaki pants, and a baseball cap pulled low over her hair. In her hands, she held a pair of binoculars, raised to her face, pointed straight at my tent. Not off to the side, not scanning the trees, directly at me. My heart jumped into my throat so fast I actually felt a little nauseous. For a few seconds I just lay there, barely breathing, hoping maybe she couldn't tell my eyes were open. I whispered, "Hello?" without meaning to. She didn't move. The binoculars stayed up, fixed on me like I wasn't really a person. I raised my voice, asking if she needed help. She didn't lower the binoculars, didn't shift her feet, didn't tilt her head. It was like I hadn't said a word. Adrenaline pushed me to move. I unzipped the tent, crawled out, and stood up so we were level. I asked again, louder this time. Only then did she lower the binoculars. Her face stayed calm, bored. She stepped backward toward the trees without turning around, eyes locked on mine, until she slipped behind the trunks and vanished. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to understand what had just happened. My hands were shaking when I started breaking camp. I stuffed my sleeping bag into the compression sack without folding it like I usually did, yanked the stakes out of the ground, and rolled the tent into a tight, uneven bundle. I didn't bother with my normal system of keeping things organized. I just shoved gear into the pack in the order I grabbed it. The whole thing took way less time than usual, but it still felt too slow. Every few seconds I straightened up and turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees, listening for someone walking. Nothing. No voice. No crunch of leaves. Just the same clearing that had seemed fine the night before, and now felt like a place I needed to leave immediately. When the last zipper was closed, I dragged the pack upright and slung it onto my shoulders, fumbling the hip belt because my fingers wouldn't stop shaking. My plan had been to keep going deeper into the loop, another 7 miles to a creek I'd picked out on the map. That didn't feel smart anymore. I told myself turning back wasn't failing, it was just making a sensible choice. I wasn't out there to prove I was fearless. I could always come back with friends and do the whole route then. As soon as I stepped back onto the trail, I set a fast pace, faster than I normally hike with a full pack. It felt like if I moved quickly enough, I could leave the whole strange encounter behind at that campsite. The pack thumped against my back and dug into my shoulders, but I didn't slow down. I kept replaying her face, that blank look, the way she lowered the binoculars and backed into the trees without a single word. I tried to come up with normal explanations. Maybe she was doing some kind of survey and didn't want to chat. Maybe she was shy. None of it made sense with the way she'd moved. I pushed like that for a long time. My boots caught on roots hidden under leaves, and once I lurched forward hard enough that I had to grab a tree to keep from going down. That was enough to remind me that if I hurt myself out there, I'd be even more screwed, so I forced myself to ease up a little. I still walked faster than usual, but I wasn't half running anymore. Every minute or so, I glanced over my shoulder, quick checks, always seeing an empty trail. After a while, my brain started trying to tell me I'd made the whole thing bigger than it really was. By the time I figured I'd covered around 3 miles, my shirt was damp and my breathing was rough. The trail climbed a short hill, and when I reached the top, I finally let myself stop. I stood there with my hands on my hips, shoulders aching under the weight of the pack, telling myself this was just nerves. It was public land. People were allowed to be weird and quiet. I tried to picture getting back to my car, calling a friend, and laughing about how I'd freaked myself out over some awkward bird watcher. That was the only reason I turned around to look. I wanted to see an empty stretch of trail and feel stupid for basically jogging away from nothing. I pivoted and looked back down the slope. On the next rise, maybe 100 yards behind me, the same woman was standing in the middle of the path. Even at that distance, I knew it was her. Dark jacket, khaki pants, baseball cap. She was facing me. While I watched, she lifted the binoculars in a slow, steady motion and pointed them toward me again, like she had been waiting for me to turn around. I didn't wait, or wave, or yell. I turned back toward the downhill side and started running. The pack dragged at my shoulders and slammed into my lower back with every step, and pain shot through my knees, but I didn't care. I refused to look over my shoulder. I decided that if she was following me, knowing how close she was would only make me freeze. My world shrank down to the dirt in front of my boots, and the idea of the parking lot and my car and a locked door. The rest of the hike out blurred together. I remember almost rolling my ankle on a loose rock and catching myself on a tree. I remember stopping once, just long enough to yank my water bottle out and spill half of it down my shirt because my hands were shaking. I kept listening for someone behind me and heard nothing except my own footsteps and my breathing. When the trees finally thinned and I saw the pale strip of the parking area through them, I felt this wave of relief so strong my eyes stung. I stepped out onto the gravel and did a quick scan without even thinking. A few more cars were there, but nobody was standing around, and she wasn't anywhere I could see. My car was exactly where I'd left it. I hit the unlock button, yanked open the back door, and shoved my pack inside without bothering to organize anything. I got into the driver's seat, locked the doors immediately, and started the engine. Then I sat there for a few seconds, staring at the trailhead sign and the opening in the trees, half expecting her to appear. Nothing moved. I backed out faster than I should have, and only started to really breathe again once I was on the main road, surrounded by other cars. Driving back toward Little Rock, I kept going back and forth about calling someone. The sheriff, the ranger station, anybody. I picked up my phone more than once and then set it down again. What was I supposed to say? That a woman watched me with binoculars and refused to talk. She hadn't touched me or threatened me. On paper, it sounded like nothing. In my head, it didn't feel like nothing. In the end, I didn't call. I went home, unpacked, showered, and tried to move on, but it stuck with me. I still hike, but only on busy trails or with friends, and when people ask why I don't do solo backpacking anymore, I just say I grew out of it. Because it's easier than explaining how one silent stranger in the woods was enough to make me decide I will never camp alone again. My little brother Liam and I hadn't spent real time together in like 5 years, because I'd been away at college and then working out of state while he finished high school. When I moved back to Colorado this summer, I figured we should do something together as adults instead of the kids who used to fight constantly. Liam's 19 now and heading to college in the fall, so I suggested a day hike. Nothing extreme, just a popular trail in Rocky Mountain National Park. 10 miles round trip, good weather forecast. He agreed, though I could tell he wasn't super excited about it and mostly liked the idea that I'd drive and pay for gas. We left early Saturday morning and got to the trailhead parking lot by 8. Decent crowd already there. Families with kids, couples, groups of college students taking selfies. I slipped right back into Big Brother mode without really thinking about it. Checked our packs twice. Made sure we had enough water and snacks, sunscreen, and an offline map downloaded on my phone. I even tossed in a small first aid kit because I knew our mom would ask. Liam rolled his eyes when I reminded him to lock his car, but he did it. First 3 miles went great. The trail climbed slowly through trees, and we were actually talking normally for once instead of arguing over stupid stuff. Liam told me about his college plans, maybe computer science, maybe switching if he hated it. And I talked about my job and why I'd finally decided to come home instead of chasing promotions somewhere else. There were a couple of quiet stretches that felt a little tense, but then one of us would bring up some dumb memory from when we were kids, like the time he broke my tooth with a Wii remote, and it would feel easy again. Around one of the higher switchbacks, this guy, maybe 50 years old with a graying beard, came up behind us. He had really nice hiking gear, big backpack, trekking poles, the whole setup. He gave off that experienced hiker vibe without even trying. He was super friendly, asked how we were doing, how far we were going. I said just up to the overlook and back. He suddenly got animated and said he knew a secret spot with an even better view, only about half a mile off trail, not marked on any maps, hardly anyone knows about it. Offered to show us since he was heading there anyway. I thanked him but said we were sticking to the main trail, wanted to keep it simple and be back before any afternoon storms rolled in. That was true, and it sounded safer. He shrugged like no big deal, said, "Have a good hike, guys," and pushed ahead, moving noticeably faster than us. Within 10 minutes we couldn't see him anymore around the bends. About 20 minutes later, Liam turned around to look at something on the trail behind us and just froze. I thought he'd dropped something. Instead, he stepped closer to me and said my name very quietly. I asked what's wrong. He didn't answer, just pointed down the trail. I turned and saw the same guy walking behind us, maybe 150 feet back, head slightly down, keeping our exact pace. I told Liam maybe it was a coincidence, Maybe he changed his mind about his secret spot and had just turned around. But even as I said it, I knew that didn't really make sense. The guy had passed us going forward earlier. That stretch of trail wasn't a loop, and there were no side paths or shortcuts he could have taken without us seeing him. The only way he'd ended up behind us was if he'd deliberately stopped somewhere and waited, or turned around and shadowed us. I picked up the pace, and so did Liam. I tried to sound casual and told him we'd push a little harder and take a long break at the overlook. About 5 minutes later, I glanced back. The guy had also sped up, still keeping roughly the same distance, like he was careful not to get any closer. Liam quietly asked what we should do. His voice had that tight sound it gets when he's trying not to freak out. I decided to test something. Up ahead, the trees closed in on the right side of the trail. I said, "When we pass that big rock, follow me into the trees and don't say anything." When we reached it, I stepped off the trail like I was just ducking into the woods to pee, and Liam slipped in behind me. As soon as we were out of sight from the trail, I told him to keep going. We moved maybe what felt like 1,000 feet through the forest parallel to the path, stepping over deadfall, branches grabbing at our legs, both of us trying not to make too much noise. Then I angled us back toward where I figured the trail would be, and we pushed through the last line of trees. We came out onto the trail further ahead than where we'd left it. I was about to tell Liam that if the guy had just been randomly behind us, we wouldn't see him again for a while. I looked forward, and my stomach dropped. The same guy was standing on the trail about 300 feet ahead of us, leaning against a tree, looking in our direction like he was waiting. Just standing there, waiting. I pulled out my phone, called 911, put it on speaker. The dispatcher asked what the emergency was. I explained as calmly as I could where we were, that we were on a marked trail in Rocky Mountain National Park, that a man was following us and had somehow gotten ahead of us when it should have been impossible given the trail layout, and that we felt threatened. I gave the trail name, the direction we were headed, told her we were 2 male hikers, 19 and 23. I kept my eyes on the guy the whole time. She told me to stay on the line and said she was sending a ranger patrol toward the trailhead. Then she asked me to describe the man and give our exact GPS location. I lifted my phone a little so it was obvious what I was doing and spoke louder on purpose. I read the coordinates off the map app, slow and clear, and described his beard, his backpack, his clothes, the hat, everything I could see. We started walking forward toward him while I talked, phone in my hand with the call screen up. He pushed off the tree and stepped into the middle of the trail like he was making a point. "I'm telling you now," I said into the phone, loud enough for him. "The man I described is standing in the middle of the trail and blocking our path." Liam stayed half a step behind my shoulder. The dispatcher told us to keep moving, to walk past him, stay together, and keep talking to her the entire time. She told us not to leave the main trail again. We kept walking straight at him. When we got close, he just watched us, then shifted a little to the side so we could squeeze through without touching him. He didn't say a word. I could feel him staring at us as we went by. We got maybe 20 feet ahead before I heard his boots behind us again. I took a quick look back. He was following, about 30 feet back now, not even pretending to look at anything else. I told the dispatcher he was still behind us, gave the distance, said he hadn't spoken or tried to grab us. She asked if he'd made any threats, if he had any weapons that we could see. I said no to both, but I added that he had turned around to stay with us and had somehow appeared ahead of us after we left the trail for a while. I said that part very clearly. If he wanted us scared, I wanted him to know this was on record. Liam stayed right next to me, so close our arms kept bumping. He didn't say anything, but his breathing was fast and shallow. Every now and then I'd look over and his jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jump. Behind us, the guy kept his distance but never dropped back. Every few minutes he'd take his phone out, hold it up chest level, and point it in our direction. It didn't look like he was filming the mountains. It looked like he was photographing us or our packs. I told the dispatcher that too. She said again that Rangers were heading to the parking lot and we just needed to keep moving toward them. We walked like that for around 40 minutes. This weird silent line on the trail. Me and Liam in front, the guy behind us, the dispatcher's voice on speaker. Other hikers went past us, coming the other way. A few of them glanced at him and then back at us, but nobody stopped or asked anything. Finally, the trees started to thin, and I could see flashes of cars through the branches. We rounded a last bend and came out into the big parking lot, full of vehicles and people loading gear, kids running around. 2 Rangers were already there by the information board. I raised my hand and pointed back over my shoulder. "That's him," I said into the phone and out loud. The Rangers looked past us, spotted him, and started walking in his direction. One of them, a woman with sunglasses and a radio on her shoulder, jerked her hand toward the row where our car was and told us to go straight there and wait. We did exactly what she said. We got in, I hit the lock button, and Liam just stared straight ahead at the dash. We could see the Rangers talking to the guy in the side mirror, one of them writing something on a notepad. It felt long, but it was probably 10 minutes before one Ranger walked over and tapped on my window. I rolled it down a few inches. He told us the man said he was just hiking the same trail, that he hadn't threatened us, hadn't touched us, and technically wasn't breaking any law by walking where we were walking. The Rangers said they couldn't detain him without a specific crime, but they had taken down his information, photographed his ID, and documented our call and statements. He said if the man showed up near us again anywhere, to call immediately, and then it would count as stalking because there was now a report. While we talked, the guy was standing by his truck at the far end of the lot, leaning on the door and staring straight at our car. I asked if we could leave. The Ranger said yes, that they'd stay in the area a while and that we should drive straight home. I pulled out of the lot and checked my mirrors the entire way back, waiting to see his truck. But it never appeared, and Liam finally said he didn't want to go hiking anymore. Not for a long time. And I told him I understood because I still can't explain how that man kept positioning himself around us on a simple out-and-back trail. And it bothers me knowing he could follow us that long and still be technically doing nothing wrong. So this happened last summer when I decided to try solo camping for the first time after my divorce. I picked a well-established campground in Colorado with a host and a mix of families and older couples. Nothing wild or far from help. I got there on Friday evening, parked near my assigned spot, and went through the routine I had practiced at home. Tent up, small fire going. A simple dinner I barely tasted because I was still figuring out if I felt proud or stupid for doing this alone. I was sitting by the fire reading when this guy walked over from the site next to mine. He looked maybe 50, gray stubble, wearing a jacket that looked older than I was. He didn't say hi first, just asked if he could borrow my car phone charger for the night. I told him he could charge his phone right then at my car if he needed. But he kept insisting he needed it overnight for his truck where he planned to sleep. Something in the way he repeated himself felt off, like he was trying to push past a boundary and see if I'd let him. When I finally said no, that I needed it for myself, his whole demeanor shifted. His face tightened, and he stared at me like I'd insulted him on purpose. The guy's voice got hard right away, and he stepped in closer like he was testing how much space he could take from me. I stood up and moved a little so the fire pit was between us, trying to look calm even though my stomach felt tight. I told him again it was an expensive charger, and I didn't feel okay handing it to someone I had known for less than a minute. He narrowed his eyes like he didn't believe me or didn't care what I said. Then he asked what the big deal was, and he said it in this clipped tone that made me feel stupid for even explaining myself. I kept my voice steady and repeated that I wasn't comfortable giving it out. That's when he looked around my campsite and asked if I was out there alone, saying people in places like this should help each other. The way he said alone made something in me lock up. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I told him my boyfriend was coming later, that he'd just gotten held up at work and would be arriving late. It was the first thing I could think of. He didn't react at first, just stared at me like he was deciding something. Then he finally turned around and walked back toward his pickup truck. As he left, he said I was too paranoid, and it sounded more like a warning than an opinion. My hands didn't stop shaking for a long time after that. I put out the fire after he went back to his truck because the light made me feel exposed. I got into my car and locked the doors, checking them twice. His pickup was about 60 feet away, and I saw the interior light come on and his silhouette sit in the driver's seat. I sat there trying to decide if I should drive to the entrance and look for the host, but I didn't know the layout and didn't trust myself to navigate the campground roads in the dark without drawing attention. I remembered the host's number was only on the board by the entrance, which didn't help now. So I stayed in my car and pushed the seat back, pretending I could rest. I kept telling myself he might go to sleep soon. Every noise made me sit up. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps on the gravel, and when I looked out, I saw his shape walking past my car toward my campsite. He didn't look at me, just stood by the fire pit where the ashes were still warm. He stayed a minute, not moving, then walked back to his truck. My heart wouldn't slow down the entire time I waited there alone. I didn't sleep at all that night. When the sun finally came up, I waited a minute before even sitting up. My back was stiff from the awkward position I'd stayed in all night, but I didn't care about that. I just kept checking the mirrors to make sure he wasn't nearby. When I didn't see his truck, I forced myself to look around more carefully. The campground was quiet, a couple of early risers moving around their sites, nothing unusual. His pickup was completely gone. I didn't know if that meant he'd left in the middle of the night or right before sunrise, but the absence made me feel even more uneasy. I got out of the car slowly, keeping my keys in my hand like that would do anything, and walked back toward my campsite. That's when I saw my charger lying on the ground next to the fire pit. I froze. I knew exactly where I had left it, inside my car, in the center console, wedged under my sunglasses. Seeing it outside, placed casually like someone had dropped it there after using it, made everything inside me go cold. I grabbed it and ran back to my car, checking the doors again. Nothing was broken. Everything looked normal. Then I remembered I'd cracked the driver's window just a little for air, maybe an inch. I'd thought it was harmless. I looked at it now, measuring the gap with my fingers, and felt stupid for underestimating how resourceful someone could be if they wanted access badly enough. It didn't take long to see what had happened. The lock had been popped, probably by something slim slid through the crack. Someone, almost definitely him, had gotten inside my car while I was in it. He'd taken the charger, used it for God knows how long, then put it back near my tent like he wanted me to know exactly what he'd done. Not stealing it, not hiding it, showing me a message. My stomach twisted so fast I had to lean on the door to steady myself. The idea that he had been right there, inches away from me while I pretended to be asleep, made my hands shake so badly I couldn't even put the charger back in the console. I didn't waste time after that. I shoved everything, my food bag, flashlight, blanket, into the back seat and then tore down the tent as fast as I could manage. I didn't roll it or fold it, just wadded it into a ball and stuffed it in the trunk. I didn't care about the mess. I didn't care that I probably looked panicked to anyone watching. I just needed to leave. When I drove out of the campground, I kept checking my mirrors the entire time because I half expected to see his pickup pull out behind me. It didn't, but that didn't make me feel any better. My brain kept replaying the moment I'd seen the charger on the ground. I thought about calling the police, rehearsing what I'd say, and every version of it sounded weak. He hadn't technically stolen anything. He hadn't touched me. He hadn't threatened me with words. Everything he'd done was just subtle enough to feel deliberate, but not obvious enough to be a clean crime. A guy broke into my car to borrow something and then returned it. Didn't sound like something an officer would take seriously. I hated how helpless that made me feel, like he knew exactly what line he could walk without consequences. I drove 20 miles before stopping at a gas station. I tried to get out to pump gas, but the second I closed my car door behind me, I felt this wave of nausea and fear hit all at once. I got back in the car and locked the doors, even though it was broad daylight, and I broke down crying in the seat. Not loud, just this shaking I couldn't stop. The whole point of going on that trip was to prove I could be independent, that the divorce hadn't taken that from me. Instead, I learned that being alone sometimes makes you look like something to take advantage of. I haven't tried solo camping again. Back in 2019, I spent a Sunday alone in the woods seeking some peace. My name is Jennifer. I was 46 then, and I had been an accountant for more than 20 years. That spring had been rough, with late nights, one messy audit, and this constant feeling that I was failing at both work and home. My husband went on a fishing trip with his friends. Our kids were staying with my parents, and for once nobody needed me for anything. That morning I looked at the sink full of dishes and the basket of laundry and decided I was not spending my one free day cleaning. I pulled out our old picnic basket, made turkey sandwiches, added some fruit and a thermos of tea, grabbed the paperback on my nightstand, and called it a plan. A coworker had told me about a small picnic spot in Jefferson National Forest, past the more popular areas, with a tiny gravel lot and a few wooden tables in a clearing. She said hardly anyone went there because you had to follow a short dirt road off the main highway, then walk a little trail in. It was about an hour from our house, which sounded perfect to me. Late that morning I drove out, following her directions, and around 11 I pulled into the tiny parking area at the end of the dirt road. There were no other cars, just my sedan, and a faded sign that said picnic area next to a narrow path disappearing into the trees. I locked the car, slung the basket over one arm, tucked the book under the other, and followed the path. After a few minutes, the trees opened up into a small grassy clearing with 3 old tables, a metal grill, and thick woods on every side. No highway noise, no voices, no music, just me and the emptiness of the place. I chose the table a little higher on the slope, the one facing deeper into the forest, so I would not be staring back toward the trail. I spread a napkin on the bench so I would not snag my skirt, set the basket beside me, and poured myself tea from the thermos. I unwrapped a sandwich, opened my book, and for the first time in months my shoulders actually started to drop. It felt almost wrong that it was so quiet on a Sunday, but I was not going to complain. For the next few hours I read, ate, and listened to the wind and the birds somewhere behind me. Every so often I would pause, expecting to hear people on the trail, but nobody ever appeared. By around 4 in the afternoon, my back was starting to protest from the hard bench and the stillness. I finished my tea, stood up to stretch, and was thinking about packing up when I heard the low crunch of an engine on the gravel road behind the trees. It slowed, then stopped, and the quiet settled again. I felt a stab of annoyance, that feeling of not wanting to share, then reminded myself it was public land, and I had been lucky to have it for so long. I sat back down, kept my eyes on the page, and listened for footsteps coming up the path. Soon, I heard footsteps on the trail and low voices getting closer. A family walked into the clearing. A man, a woman, and 2 teenagers, a boy and a girl around 16. They looked ordinary, jeans and t-shirts and a light summer dress, carrying folding chairs and a big cooler. I gave a polite smile and nod. The woman nodded back, and the man only dipped his head once without a real smile. They passed the closer tables, took the one farthest from me, and the man sat facing me with his arms crossed while the woman leaned toward the teens, whispering. They sat there without opening the cooler, someone looking over, and after I checked my watch, realized it was past 4:30, and my phone was in the car, I closed my book and started putting the food back into the basket. As soon as I started packing up, the woman from their group stood up and walked toward me. Up close, she looked completely ordinary, like someone you'd see at a school event, but the smile on her face looked glued on. She said they'd forgotten a knife in the car and asked if I could lend mine for a minute so she could cut something from the cooler. I hesitated, because there was this little alarm in my head saying you don't hand a stranger a blade when you're alone, but it felt stupid and rude to say no over a tiny folding knife in the middle of the day. I told myself I was being dramatic, reached into the basket, and pulled out my small folding knife, closing it before I handed it to her. She thanked me in this bright, polite voice and walked back to their table. I pretended to fuss with my stuff, but I watched. She didn't open the cooler. She just put the knife down on the table and leaned toward the man, saying something low. The teenager stood up at the same time, like someone had given a signal. Before I really processed that, they were already walking straight toward me along the edge of the clearing, not smiling, not looking around, just locked on my table. I stayed where I was because I honestly thought they were coming to bring the knife back, or maybe ask if I was leaving soon. Instead, the boy went straight to the bench where my backpack was sitting and grabbed it with one hand, swinging it over his shoulder like it was his. The girl stepped past me, close enough that her arm brushed mine, and lifted my picnic basket. It was so smooth and fast that for a second my brain didn't catch up. Then I heard myself bark, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I took a step toward them. That's when the man got up. He moved quicker than I expected, crossed the space between the tables in a few long strides, and planted himself right in front of me. He didn't yell, didn't swear, didn't touch me. He just stood there, broad and solid, blocking my way like a wall. Up close, I could see he was calm, almost bored. His eyes were flat, no embarrassment, no anger, just this cold attention that made my stomach drop. Behind him, the woman picked up my folded knife and slipped it into her pocket. The teens had already turned toward the trail with my bag and basket like this was just a chore they'd been sent to do. I raised my voice, told them to stop, to give my things back, that it wasn't funny. The man took one small step closer, and I automatically stepped back. He didn't say don't move, but his whole body said exactly that. I understood that if I tried to dodge around him, I'd be in an actual physical fight with a man who was stronger and who clearly did not care about me at all. The woman started walking toward the trail too, not even glancing at me now. For a few seconds I just kept backing away from him, my brain stuck between scream for help and don't escalate this. When he finally turned his head to check on the others and shifted like he was going to follow them, something in me snapped into motion. While his attention was off me, I spun around and ran toward the opposite side of the clearing, onto the narrow path I hadn't used before. I heard him shout something behind me, short and angry, but I didn't look back to see if he was coming. I just ran. The trail was rough, roots and loose rocks catching my shoes, branches hitting my arms, but adrenaline pushed me forward. All I was thinking was, get away. Don't lead them to the car, just get away. The path twisted and dipped, and at one point it forked. I took the wider branch without slowing down. After a while, I saw a thin strip of pavement through the trees and almost stumbled from relief. I came out onto a quiet road and had to put a hand on my knee because my legs felt like they might give out. I patted my pockets and almost cried when I felt my phone and car keys still there. There was a weak signal. Good enough. I called 911 and told the dispatcher my name, that I was in Jefferson National Forest somewhere near a small picnic area, and that a family had just taken my backpack, wallet, keys, food, and my knife. She kept me on the line, asked if I was hurt, and patched me through to the local sheriff's office. They told me to stay where I was and wait for a patrol car. A county deputy finally pulled up, and I got into the front seat and went through the whole story again, stumbling over parts, apologizing for not getting their plate number. He shook his head and said, "You did the right thing getting out of there." Then he drove us back toward the little gravel parking area. No lights, just slow and careful along the road. It was maybe 40 minutes from my first call by the time we turned down the dirt road. My heart was hammering, half expecting to see that family standing by my car. But when we pulled into the lot, my sedan was sitting there alone. The minivan I'd heard earlier was gone. So for the context, my boyfriend Kyle had been planning this camping trip, wanted to show me his spot, a lake in Washington he'd been going to for years. It was my first overnight camping experience, and I was nervous, but tried not to show it, because Kyle was so excited talking about fishing at dawn and the stars. We left Friday after work, got to the trailhead around 8, and started up in twilight. Kyle carried the big backpack, I had the food. He said in summer there were always other campers, but in September we'd probably have the place to ourselves. I joked that it was creepy that nobody would know where we were. He laughed, said his friends knew the area, then got quieter as it got steeper, kept checking his watch and stopping to listen before moving on like he was making sure we were alone. We reached the lake when it was already dark, about 10:30. Kyle set up the tent fast and I helped. While he messed with the fire and food, I stood by the water looking at the moon on the lake. It was beautiful and quiet. We ate canned chili and granola bars and sat by the fire. I'd expected Kyle to be relaxed and happy, but he was tense, kept looking over his shoulder into the trees. Twice he got up mid-sentence to shine his flashlight into the forest. I asked if everything was okay, and he just said yeah, he was tired and his stomach felt off. He forced a smile and asked if I was having fun. I said yes, but suggested we go to sleep, and he agreed fast. Inside the tent, we zipped everything up and crawled into our sleeping bags. I thought I'd pass out instantly, but my brain wouldn't switch off. The forest felt too loud and unfamiliar. I kept hearing cracking sounds, then rustling, then nothing. At one point, there was a snap from the direction of the trail, and I whispered if there could be other hikers coming in late. Kyle said it was probably deer and shifted closer so our shoulders touched, but I could feel how tense he was. After a while, his breathing went slow and even. I watched the tent ceiling and tried to copy his breathing, telling myself if he, the experienced camper, wasn't worried, I shouldn't be either. Eventually, the sounds blended together and I must have drifted off. I woke up suddenly with an immediate sense that something was wrong. No nightmare, no loud noise, just that inner alarm. I checked my phone, 2:47 a.m. Kyle was on his side with his back to me, but his breathing was too steady, like he was pretending to be asleep. I whispered his name. He turned over right away, eyes open, and whispered, "Do you hear it?" I held my breath and listened. That's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, heavy steps on gravel and pine needles, moving around our tent, in a circle. I asked if it was an animal. Kyle shook his head and whispered that animals don't walk that methodically in circles, and this was definitely bipedal. The steps were close, maybe 6 feet from the tent. They'd go a few steps, pause, then keep going again. Kyle reached for his backpack and things clinked inside. He pulled out a knife, opened the blade with a click, then grabbed his flashlight. He whispered that he was going to look outside. I grabbed his arm and said, "No, don't." But he said he needed to know if it was a person messing with us or some hunter, and he was unzipping the entrance. Then he crawled out with the flashlight and the knife. I heard him stand up outside, heard his boots scrape in the dirt as he turned, sweeping the light around. For a few seconds there was just his breathing and the sound of the lake. Then his voice, loud and firm. "Nobody's out here." A minute later he came back, said he couldn't see anything, no tracks in the wet ground near the tent, though he couldn't really examine it closely. We sat in the tent and didn't lie back down, stared at the zipper. About 30 minutes later, the footsteps started again, closer, right against the tent wall. Kyle whispered, "I told you. I felt it when we arrived. Something's wrong with this place. We should have left." I asked what he meant. He said he didn't know, just that it felt like we weren't alone or welcome. The steps moved along one side of the tent, stopped, then started on the other at the same pace. Sometimes there were a few minutes of silence, then they came back. Nobody touched the zipper. We stayed like that until the fabric turned from black to gray. Around 5, it was getting light. Kyle checked his phone and said, "We're packing and leaving. No breakfast." I agreed. We unzipped the tent and moved fast, shoving sleeping bags and clothes into the backpacks, then rolled the tent into a bundle. It took maybe 20 minutes. I kept expecting someone to step from the trees, but the woods stayed quiet. The campsite looked normal, no clear prints or broken branches. Kyle scanned the tree line, said, "Let's go," and we walked to the trail, me in front, him behind. We started down at a steady pace, watching our footing. A few minutes in, I heard rustling in the bushes to the right of the trail, moving in the same direction we were. I stopped. Kyle bumped into me. The rustling didn't stop. Whatever it was kept going, heavy enough to crack branches, staying level with us instead of crossing the trail or fading away. It felt intentional. Kyle sucked in a breath, then shouted, "Who's there?" For a couple of seconds, everything went silent. Then the movement started again, louder now, with branches snapping and bushes shaking. Kyle grabbed my hand and said, "Faster. Just keep going. Don't stop." His voice was calm, but tight. Turning back toward the lake didn't even feel like an option. We sped up until we were almost running. The sounds in the brush stayed right beside us, never closer or farther. When I glanced right, I only saw shaking branches, never a person. At one rocky section, I slipped and hit my hands, scraping my palm. Kyle pulled me up, asked if I was okay. I said yes, and we kept going because stopping felt worse. When the trees thinned and I saw gravel ahead, I felt like I could breathe. The car was where we'd left it, around 7, full daylight. Kyle unlocked it before we were off the trail. We threw the backpacks into the back seat, got in, and locked the doors. For a minute we sat there, breathing hard. Then Kyle went still, staring at the rearview mirror. I turned and looked out the back window. At the edge of the lot, several branches at chest height were broken and bent outward into a gap like someone had stood there. I asked if it could have been a bear. Kyle shook his head and said bears don't break branches like that, or follow people deliberately. We watched the gap. Then he started the engine and drove away. We didn't talk on the drive home. That evening, Kyle said that in 5 years of camping at that lake, nothing like this had ever happened. It had always been safe. He said he's never going back, and I said I'm not either. But I still think about whoever was up there, close enough to circle our tent and follow us down the mountain and never show their face. About 2 years ago, me and 3 friends spent a night at the bottom of Red Rock Canyon after a day of climbing. I'm 32 now, and I've done a lot of trips, but this one still pops into my head way more than it should. There were 4 of us: me, Kevin, Alyssa, and Jordan. All pretty solid climbers. We'd been talking about this overnight for months, worked around everyone's schedules, did the permit thing, checked weather. Around 6 in the evening, we reached the canyon floor, dropped our packs by a shallow stream, and set up our bivvies on a flat, sandy patch a little back from the water. Nothing felt weird at first. We filtered water, fired up the stove, ate those salty, freeze-dried dinners that somehow taste amazing when you're beat. We sat around in our base layers talking about routes we wanted to try the next day, and mocking whoever had whined the most on the approach. The opposite canyon wall went straight up maybe 300 feet. As the light faded, you could see less and less detail until it was just a big, dark wall. By around 10, we were done eating, food packed away, bear can set, and everyone was heading off behind boulders for the last bathroom trip before sleep. I was halfway into my bivvy when Alyssa yelled my name, not screaming, just urgent. She was standing by the stream with her headlamp off, pointing across the canyon. I switched mine off and looked where she was aiming. At first I thought I was seeing stars over the rim, but these lights were too low and they were moving. Maybe halfway up the wall there was a thin horizontal strip of light we hadn't noticed in daylight. Small points of light slid along it, stopping, then drifting on. Flashlights or lanterns, clearly people. A couple seconds later we heard it. Drums. Not a song, just a deep, steady pounding that bounced around the canyon. Boom, boom, boom. Slow, same tempo over and over. It instantly made my skin crawl a little and I couldn't really say why. Kevin said, "What the hell?" grabbed his binoculars and tried to focus on the ledge. It took him a minute, but he finally said there were at least 5 or 6 people up there moving around those lights. We just stood there in the dark and listened. The drum kept going with short pauses where it stopped and then started again. Every now and then we heard voices over it. Not shouting drunk voices, more like chanting or singing something low and repetitive that we couldn't make out. It didn't sound like a party. It sounded planned. Jordan finally said it might be some kind of native ceremony. There are reservations and sacred spots all over that region, and that explanation fit better than anything else we had. As soon as he said that, the mood shifted. It went from sketchy people doing something stupid to, we're watching something that probably has nothing to do with us and we should stay out of it. None of us even suggested trying to hike closer in the dark. We're used to making conservative calls, breaking ankles on unknown terrain above a drop just to satisfy curiosity would have been ridiculous. So we stayed on the canyon floor, lamps off, just watching and listening. We probably stood there for about an hour. Nobody checked a watch. The drums sort of took over that job. The lights would bunch together, then spread out along the ledge, then cluster again. After a while, they started going out one by one. The drum slowed, a couple of scattered hits, then stopped completely. The last thing we heard was one long shout from up on the ledge, just a loud voice carrying across the canyon. Then it went quiet again, except for the stream. Kevin finally said, "Okay, that was weird." And we all kind of laughed once, more from nerves than anything. We agreed we'd try to find that ledge in the morning, see if there was a trail or some kind of easy way up that we'd missed. It felt wrong to go poking around in the middle of whatever that was, but none of us wanted to pretend we hadn't seen anything. After that, we went back to the normal routine. We climbed into our bivvies, zipped up, and listened to the water until we drifted off. Next morning, we got up with first light. Quick food and coffee, no hanging around. Everyone kept looking at the opposite wall like daylight was going to reveal some obvious shelf we'd somehow not noticed. But it just looked like any other wall. Cracks, shadows, nothing that screamed, "big ledge right here." We crossed the stream at a shallow section and started walking along the base, scanning for any weakness that led toward where the lights had been. Jordan spotted the way up first, a narrow crack system trending toward that height. It wasn't really a route, more of a steep scramble with a couple of short chimney moves. We roped up light, more for habit than necessity, and made our way up, dropping a few pieces where it felt smart. It took maybe 20 minutes before we topped out onto a long, narrow ledge running along the wall exactly where we'd expected it. Up close, it was obvious a group had been there recently. The sandy dirt was packed down and scuffed, not untouched. In a few shallow rock pockets, we found cold ash piles from several small fires. Boot prints overlapped all over the place, some leading right up to the edge and back. For a second, I felt that same, "we're walking into someone else's space" thing from the night before. Then we started noticing the smaller details. In one ash pile, there were melted chunks of plastic bottle fused into the charcoal. Another had blobs of burned synthetic fabric, the kind you get from cheap nylon jackets or packs. On the rock nearby, someone had spray-painted symbols. They didn't look traditional at all. Just messy tags and crude shapes like you'd see on the side of an underpass. Trash was scattered everywhere. Empty beer cans wedged into cracks, fast food wrappers half buried in the dirt, a torn plastic bag snagged on a rock. The whole place felt less like a sacred spot and more like a hidden hangout somebody's group had claimed. Kevin bent down, picked up one of the crushed beer cans, turned it in his hand, and looked at me with this confused expression. We climbed back down pretty quickly. Once we'd seen the trash and the spray paint, the ledge just felt like somebody's dirty campsite, not some sacred spot, and none of us wanted to be up there if the group came back. We took a couple quick photos of the ash piles and the graffiti in case anyone asked what we'd seen, then reversed the crack and dropped back onto the canyon floor. Nobody really said much on the way down. It was like we were all trying to match what we'd heard the night before with what we'd just walked through. Back at the bivvies, we packed up fast. Gear went into packs, helmets clipped on, ropes coiled without much talking. The plan had been to stay another night and do a longer route on the far wall, but nobody pushed for it now. It wasn't like we were scared of the place. It just felt off, and it seemed smarter to hike out, tell someone who actually worked there, and then decide later if we wanted to climb in that canyon again. So we shouldered our packs and headed for the trailhead. By late morning, we were back at the parking area. There was a park truck a few spots over and a ranger standing by it, writing on a clipboard. Kevin glanced at us and said we should probably tell him what we'd seen, and everyone agreed right away. It didn't feel like tattling. It felt like information he might actually need. We walked over and told him about the lights on the wall, the drums, the voices, how long it went on. He listened without interrupting, then asked what we'd found when we climbed up there in the morning. We described the trampled ground, the separate fire pits, the plastic melted into the ashes, the spray paint on the rock, the beer cans and fast food wrappers scattered around. As soon as we mentioned the paint, he frowned and shook his head. He said the tribes in the area do sometimes hold private ceremonies in the canyons, and when they do, they always tell the Park Service ahead of time, and they never leave trash or markings behind. Then he said that lately they'd been having trouble with what he called New Age seekers, people coming out to do their own made-up rituals, trying to copy native ceremonies without any real connection to the tribes. Based on what we told him, he said, it was almost definitely tourists playing Indian. That exact phrase stuck with me. He added that when it's a real tribal event, they are strict about leaving no trace at all, and spray paint alone would rule them out. He pulled out a small notebook, wrote down our names and a phone number, and said he or someone from his crew would hike in to document the site and try to scrub off the paint if they could. Before we left, he thanked us for speaking up and said the tribes had been pretty upset about outsiders turning their traditions into a kind of weekend game. Driving home, What bothered me wasn't that they'd been there. It was how they'd poured effort into the performance of it. Hauling drums to that wall, building fires, spending hours on a made-up ceremony. It felt like they wanted to act spiritual while leaving trash and spray paint on land that wasn't theirs. The ranger had mentioned complaints, and the more I replayed those lights and drums, the more it felt worse than if we'd found nothing there. About this was 3 months ago. HR decided 15 of us who normally only interact by email had to spend a weekend at a wilderness camp in upstate New York. Nobody was thrilled, but it was mandatory. The director checked who showed up. Last time I'd slept in a tent was Boy Scouts at 12. Most of my co-workers had even less experience with the outdoors. We left Friday afternoon in 2 rental vans. It was supposed to be a 3-hour drive, but dragged until everyone's phones lost signal. We pulled into the camp around 6. Standard setup: a clearing, fire pit, outhouse, 8 green tents in a circle. 2 instructors, Daniel and Amanda, met us, did the welcome speech, laid out rules, and pointed out the trail we weren't supposed to take without them. They split us into cooking groups. I ended up with Lisa from accounting and Steven from support. We just ate off paper plates by the fire. After dinner, they went straight into team building, rope puzzles, blindfold guiding, trust falls. People played along, but you could tell they were done. At 10, they finally called lights out and everyone headed for the tents. I was sharing a 3-person tent with Steven and another coworker, Jason. We picked sides, shoved our bags to the corners, zipped everything up. Lying in my sleeping bag, I realized how soft office life had made me. The ground felt hard, and every crack in the wood sounded like something walking toward us. Steven started snoring while I stared at my phone even though there was no service. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up and realized why. Footsteps outside. Slow steps on grass and leaves, coming from the left side of the circle. I figured it was an instructor doing a head count. It fit the safety speech from earlier, but the pacing was off. Whoever it was moved tent to tent, stopping in front of each for maybe 20 seconds. No flashlight, no voice, just those careful steps. In my head, I traced the circle and counted. It matched. 8 tents, 8 stops. Steven's snoring cut off and he whispered, "You hear that?" I said it was probably Daniel. Jason shifted and said it felt wrong, that if you were just counting heads, you wouldn't stand there that long. Right after he said that, there was a dull thunk outside, like a heavy piece of wood hitting dirt. We froze. A few seconds later, there was another thunk from farther around the circle. Steven whispered, "What the hell is he doing?" Nobody moved. The footsteps started again, fading toward the tree line until they were gone. No one unzipped the tent to look. I checked my phone. 2:35 a.m., 1 useless bar. We lay there listening to nothing until Steven drifted back off, and I finally did too. Morning came and everyone dragged themselves to the fire pit for breakfast, looking like they hadn't slept. Lisa immediately asked if anyone else had heard footsteps going around the tents. About half the group said yes. While we were comparing notes, Michelle from marketing said there was something weird in front of her tent. 2 thick branches laid in a clean X right at the entrance. We followed her back and saw it. The branches hadn't just fallen there, the ground under them was scraped clear. That started a chain reaction of checking. 3 other tents had similar stick crosses in front of the zippers. Our tent didn't have one. People asked if it was part of an exercise, or if someone got bored and tried to freak everyone out. Nobody admitted to leaving their tent. We brought Daniel and Amanda over and asked what it meant. They both looked surprised. They said there were no night checks, that they'd been sleeping in the van, and if this was a joke, it wasn't theirs. Daniel tried to laugh it off. saying maybe a raccoon had moved some branches around. Jason just shook his head and said a raccoon doesn't make a perfect cross. The atmosphere was tense. Nobody found it funny. After Daniel and Amanda went off to check the grounds, they tried to keep us busy with a rope course guiding blindfolded co-workers through cones. Michelle kept watching me until I asked if she was okay. She said, "Can we talk over there?" So we stepped down the path a little. She told me she'd woken around 3 to rustling right by her head on the tent wall, like somebody kneeling outside. When she opened her eyes, she saw a tall, human-shaped shadow on the fabric by her head. No light, no talking. It stood there for maybe a minute, then turned and walked away. She'd assumed it was Daniel, but after seeing the stick cross, she knew that didn't fit and thought it had to be some stranger. While she was talking, Greg came over and said his tent had been shoved hard from outside around the same time, shaking it and waking all 3 guys. They yelled, "Who's there?" But nobody answered and they didn't hear anyone run off. He said if this was a prank, he wanted a name for HR. The 3 of us went to Daniel and Amanda, told them about the shadow, the shove, and the crosses. Daniel didn't joke. He said they'd walk the perimeter and asked us to stay with the group so nobody went looking on their own. They were gone a while. When they came back, Daniel called everyone to the fire pit and said they'd found boot prints starting at the tree line, walking straight toward camp, then turning and going back the same way. The tread didn't match their boots or ours, and the size was large. He said it was probably another camper who got turned around and wandered through. Someone asked if that person could come back. Daniel paused, then said he doubted it, and that pause made people more nervous than the answer. By lunch, people were openly saying they wanted to leave. During a break, Lisa told Daniel that if we had to stay another night, we wanted cabins or locks and someone awake. Otherwise, they'd call our director. He said he understood but had to clear it with his boss in HR. While they were gone, people started packing. When he came back, he said that if the majority wanted to cut the retreat short, they could get the vans. We voted. 12 out of 15 wanted to leave. The 3 who didn't were dev guys who called it an adventure, but when they saw everyone else was going, they said they'd go too. Soon we were in the vans heading back, leaving the tents and stick crosses for the camp staff. On the ride, people talked about some local guy, or the crosses being a warning, plus one half joke from Steven about HR staging a resilience exercise that nobody believed. Back home, it didn't just fade. A few days later, Daniel posted in the company chat saying he'd talked to local rangers. They had no reports of suspicious people or camps nearby. HR replied under his message, apologized for the distressing experience, refunded everyone's costs, and promised that future events would be at more controlled locations like cabins or hotels instead of open campgrounds. People reacted with a few emojis and then moved on. But I keep thinking about the fact that some stranger picked our camp, walked a circle around 8 tents, pushed on people's walls in the dark, and then went back into the trees like it was normal. Nobody from our company has suggested corporate camping trips since then. In late September last year, me and my 2 sons, Brandon and Kyle, went out to check some hunting grounds in the Alleghenies before season opened. Both my boys are grown now. Brandon's 23 and Kyle's 21, but we still keep up the tradition of hunting together every year. I'm 46, old enough to feel it in my knees, but not so old I can't keep up with them. We were walking this old logging road that's mostly grown over, just talking about stands and rub lines and who was taking vacation when. Nothing heavy. Brandon was out in front like he always is, Kyle behind me kicking at rocks, and I remember thinking it was one of those simple good days you don't really appreciate until later. Maybe 15 minutes in, Kyle said, half joking, that something smelled off. I told him it was probably a dead deer. Happens all the time out there. but he kept looking off to the right like something had caught his eye. About 90 feet off the trail, the brush thinned and you could see this bare patch of ground. At first, I figured it was where somebody had parked equipment years ago, or maybe bears had torn it up, but it looked straight, too straight. Brandon goes, "That looks like somebody dug a grave," in that teasing tone, but he was already stepping off the road before I could tell him to slow down. The closer we got, the less funny it was. It wasn't just a scrape. It was a clean rectangular pit, maybe 6 by 6 and about 3 feet deep, with the loose dirt piled in a neat ridge on one side like somebody meant to come back and finish the job. The walls were straight, not clawed out. My first thought was somebody poaching and hiding deer parts, and I was already annoyed at that idea when Brandon hopped down into the pit. He crouched, brushed at a dark mound in the corner, and that's when we saw the clothes. At first I thought it might be rags or a tarp bunched up, but you could clearly see pant legs, a t-shirt twisted around itself, something white that turned out to be underwear. There was a pile of women's clothing at the bottom. Brandon started carefully going through it, holding stuff up for a second, then setting it aside. Jeans, several t-shirts, underwear, Nike sneakers that still looked pretty new, a light jacket that would have fit a smaller woman. Everything looked relatively clean, not rotten, not chewed up, like it hadn't been there long. Kyle stood beside me at the edge and muttered that this felt wrong, like we were somewhere we weren't supposed to be, and my stomach kind of dropped because I felt the same thing but stronger. Under the clothes, Brandon found a woman's purse, fake leather, kind of beat up along the seams. He handed it up to me and I stepped back from the pit so I didn't drop anything into it. Inside were a driver's license for Michelle Harris, 34 years old, address in Pennsylvania, a couple of old receipts, and some store cards. There was also a phone with a cracked screen that wouldn't turn on, 3 credit cards with the same name, and $40 cash folded in half. Kyle took a photo of the license and another of the pit with everything laid out. I remember holding that ID, looking at her picture, and having this clear thought that whoever Michelle Harris was, she hadn't meant to leave all of this in a hole in the middle of nowhere. We didn't really need to talk about what to do next. Brandon put everything back in the purse, we set the clothes roughly how they'd been, and we climbed back to the logging road. Nobody joked on the walk out. I kept glancing back through the trees like whoever dug that pit might be standing there watching us, even though I knew that was probably just my brain spinning. Back at my truck, I unlocked the doors, sat down for a second with my hands on the wheel, then called the local sheriff's department and told them exactly what we'd found and where. A sheriff showed up a little while later, big guy about 50 with this tired look on his face, like he'd driven out for a lot of false alarms over the years. We met him at the gate and walked him in the same way we'd gone, pointing out the turnoff, the distance from the road, all of it. At the pit, he put on gloves, climbed down, and went through the clothes like he was sorting laundry, checking tags and pockets. He took the purse, copied the license info into his notebook, looked at the broken phone, counted the cash. Kyle and Brandon hung back a little, arms crossed, eyes bouncing between him and the tree line. I asked if they were going to dig deeper, look for a body, because that neat rectangle and the way the dirt was piled was sitting in my head like a weight. He shook his head and said, "You know how many people just dump old stuff in the woods? Could be this woman had some kind of symbolic ceremony, buried her old life, new age stuff." He said it casual, almost bored. Brandon pushed back, pointing at the purse on the ground and asking about the phone, the money, the ID. Who throws that away if they're just doing some ceremony? The sheriff just shrugged, like he'd already decided it wasn't his problem, and said he'd file a report and check the name against missing persons. That night at the motel, I couldn't sleep. That pit kept popping into my head every time I closed my eyes. Brandon down in it, clothes spread out around his boots. My sons had the TV on low, some hunting show, but nobody was paying attention. Around midnight, I finally sat up, grabbed my laptop off the dresser and told them I wanted to check something. I typed Michelle Harris, Pennsylvania missing into Google and just stared at the first page of results. The second result was an article from 2 weeks earlier titled, "Family Continues Search for Missing Teacher." The photo hit me first. Same face from the license, only smiling, standing in front of a classroom board with markers on the tray. The article said Michelle Harris had disappeared August 15th after telling her husband she was going hiking for the weekend. She left early Saturday, texted once around noon that she was at the trailhead, and then nothing. Her car was still sitting at a trailhead parking lot in West Virginia, the same area we were hunting. Police were calling it a possible voluntary disappearance, but her family said she would never just walk away. I scrolled down and read the whole thing twice. There was a line from some spokesperson saying Michelle might have chosen to step away from her current life, and something about stress and personal issues. It sounded like they were guessing. It also sounded like they wanted it to be her choice, so they didn't have to treat it like a crime. I clicked 2 more articles. Same photo, same basic facts, same idea that maybe she had just taken off. Nothing about any search teams in the area. Nothing about that patch of woods. Brandon noticed I'd gone quiet and asked what I was doing. I turned the laptop so they could see. They read the headline, then the part about the car being found near here, and neither of them said anything for a long second. Kyle finally muttered, "That's her," and Brandon asked if I thought that pit had been meant for a body. I told them I didn't know. We closed the laptop. Next morning, right after sunrise, we packed up and drove straight back to the sheriff's office. The sheriff came out after a few minutes, same tired look, coffee in his hand. I handed him the printout from the article and gave him Kyle's phone so he could swipe through the pictures we took of the pit, the clothes, and the purse. He read the headline, checked Michelle's face against the license in his file, then asked me to go over everything again from the moment Kyle spotted the disturbed ground. When I finished, he nodded, said it was a good catch, and told us he'd pass all of it to the Pennsylvania police who were handling her case. 2 months have gone by now. I've called the sheriff's office every couple of weeks. Not enough to be a problem, but enough that they know my name. Every time I get the same answer. Investigation ongoing. Nothing they can share. A couple of times I almost asked if anyone had actually gone back out there with dogs or shovels, but I stopped myself because I already knew what the answer would sound like. Hunting season opened, but I told the boys we were skipping that side of the mountain. I remember that pit, and I think about how many more pits like that might be out there in those huge forests that nobody will ever find. Way back in October 2022, I went hiking alone on the Lion's Head Loop in the White Mountains, a pretty popular 5-mile trail. I specifically chose it because there are always lots of people around, and I really like solo hiking, but prefer busy trails for safety. It was a Monday morning around 10, and there were maybe 12 cars in the lot, enough to feel secure. I locked my car, tightened my pack, started going clockwise like the sign recommended, put my earbuds in, and turned on a crime podcast. About a mile in, I actually saw a man coming toward me around a bend. Mid-30s maybe. Gray hoodie, hood down, dark sunglasses, hands in the front pocket. He gave a quick nod as we squeezed past each other on the narrow bit, and I nodded back. That automatic trail politeness. Nothing about him stuck out to me then, besides the hoodie. 10, maybe 15 minutes later, I noticed another figure ahead, also somehow coming toward me. Same gray hoodie, same build. As we got closer, I saw it was the same guy, just without the sunglasses this time. For a second, my brain tried to tell me it was just another dude dressed the same, but his face killed that idea. He nodded again, I nodded, slower, and I know my eyebrows pulled together because I was doing the math in my head. The loop was 5 miles. There weren't any obvious cutoffs or side trails where he could have somehow passed me without me seeing him, and he definitely hadn't jogged by. It was too soon for him to have done the whole thing around. I told myself maybe he turned around right after we passed the first time, realized he forgot something or decided he didn't like going that direction. That was the only explanation that didn't feel crazy, so I grabbed it. Still, I paused my podcast and left the earbuds in so they just sat there like earplugs. I wanted to hear everything now. I focused on my breathing and not rolling an ankle, but my brain kept circling back to that second pass. After maybe 20 minutes, I stopped at a little flat spot to drink some water. Out of habit, I glanced back down the trail. He was there, behind me now, maybe 100 feet back, walking in the same direction I was. No sunglasses, just his face angled down like he was watching the ground. I put the bottle away and started walking again, a little faster. It was a popular loop, middle of the day. I'd seen other people. I had cell service the last time I'd been on this trail. 10 minutes later, I looked again. He'd closed the gap to maybe 60 feet, but still wasn't catching up. When I sped up on a flatter stretch, he sped up too. When I deliberately slowed down to adjust my laces, he slowed down. The distance between us stayed the same. He just matched me. That's when it stopped feeling like a coincidence and started feeling like I was being paced. I thought back to seeing him twice coming toward me. He must have been turning around each time I got close, pretending to be heading the opposite direction so it looked casual. Then once I passed, he'd turn again and follow. I didn't want to give away that I'd figured it out, so I kept my eyes forward and started almost jogging on the flat sections, pushing harder than I normally would there. Every few minutes I did a quick fake scenery check over my shoulder. Every time he was there in that same gray hoodie, same steady pace, never closing all the way, never dropping back. I started counting steps between glances, trying not to obsess, trying to plan what I'd do if he finally ran up on me. When the trees finally thinned and the trail opened into that last straight section leading toward the parking lot, something in me just flipped. I stopped pretending everything was fine. I shoved my phone into my pocket, leaned forward, and just ran. I didn't look back, legs burning. I burst out of the trees and into the parking lot, almost tripping when my shoes hit the pavement. There was a couple there, a man and a woman maybe around 50, loading packs into the back of their SUV. I went straight to them without even thinking. My chest was heaving and my voice came out thin and shaky when I said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry. Can you walk me to my car? Someone's been following me on the trail." The woman turned toward me first and her whole face shifted like she understood before I finished the sentence. She didn't ask for proof or anything, just stepped closer and said, "Yeah, of course. Where's your car?" The man shut the hatch and looked between us, trying to figure out how bad it was. I pointed with a shaking hand. Over there, the silver hatchback. He was behind me for like half the trail, keeping the same distance, and before that, he kept pretending to walk the other way. The man frowned, looked over my shoulder toward the trailhead and said, "We'll walk with you. Stay between us, all right?" His tone was calm and firm, not dramatic, and that almost made me want to cry. I moved so I was on the side farthest from the trail as we crossed the lot. My hands were shaking so hard I shoved them under my arms. I couldn't stop myself from looking back. The guy in the gray hoodie was standing right where the trail turned into asphalt. He'd stopped walking. No more fake hiking, no casual pace. Just standing there, hood up now, hands in his hoodie pocket, staring straight at us. He didn't move, didn't call out, didn't even pretend to be on his phone. Just watched. The woman saw him and muttered, "Is that him?" I nodded. That was all it took for the man's whole posture to shift tighter, like he'd decided this was real. He sped up our pace a little and got us to my car. When we reached it, he told his wife quietly, "Stay here with her," then pulled his phone out. For a second, I thought he was calling 911, but instead he walked to the driver's side of their SUV, grabbed a pen and some receipt, and then started going down the row of cars. It took me a second to realize he was writing down license plates. He made a slow pass along the side closer to the trail, looking from each plate to the guy in the hoodie. There was a blue sedan parked near the entrance, older, nothing special. He paused at that one, looked up at the guy, and wrote that plate very carefully. The guy in the hoodie never came closer, never left, just kept standing there like he was waiting to see what I'd do. I unlocked my car with clumsy hands and opened the door, but I didn't get in yet. Turning my back on him felt wrong. When the man came back, he had a small list on the receipt. He showed it to his wife and then handed it to me. "Just in case," he said. "We don't know which one is his, but it's one of these. You can give them to the police if you decide to report it." His voice was steady, like this was just the logical step. The woman asked, "Do you want us to call the police now? We can stay until they get here." I stood there holding the paper and looked at the hoodie guy again. He hadn't moved an inch. From that distance, I couldn't read his face, but I knew he could see the three of us looking right back at him. My brain kept trying to write the sentence I'd say to a dispatcher, and all I could come up with was, "A man walked on the same trail as me in a way that scared me. No threats, no grabbing, no words. Just that pacing and turning around, over and over." I could hear the possible sigh on the other end of the line. "I don't know what they could even do," I finally said. "He hasn't actually done anything." The woman pressed her lips together but didn't push it. The man just nodded once and said, "Okay, then let's at least make sure you get out of here safe," and moved so he was facing the trailhead while I climbed into my car. I shut the door, locked it, and started the engine. My hands left sweat on the steering wheel. Before backing out, I forced myself to look at the trail one more time. He was still there, same spot, staring straight at my car like he was trying to memorize it. As I pulled out of the space and turned toward the exit, I saw him in my rearview mirror. No phone, no backpack, no movement. Just watching me drive away. The couple stayed where they were, moving their gear around in that fake way people do when they're actually paying attention to something else, and I knew they were waiting to make sure I really left. I didn't start shaking for real until I hit the main road. That was when it landed how much thought he'd put into it. Those 2 times I'd passed him going the opposite direction weren't random. He'd set them up so I would see him and think, "Oh, he's just heading back." He'd kept just far enough away that nothing crossed a clear line. He'd done everything he could to make sure that, if I called the police, all I'd have was a bad feeling and a story that sounded dramatic and thin at the same time. That calculation is what still messes with me. If he'd just yelled something or run at me once, I could have filed him away as a one-off creep. Instead, it felt like he was testing how close he could get to doing something without consequences. I never hike alone anymore, even on busy trails, and I will not go back on that loop. When friends bring it up, I just say I'm bored of it and change the subject. I still have that receipt with the plates folded up in my glove compartment, and sometimes when I'm stuck at a red light or sitting in a dark parking lot, I think about what would have happened if that couple hadn't been there when I came out of the trees, and I can't finish that thought. Someone tried to get into our tent that night, and when we called the ranger station in the morning, they told us there were no patrols in our area. I was still half in my sleeping bag, phone on speaker between us, while some tired woman repeated, "Sir, there are no rangers assigned to that sector this weekend." A few hours before that call, I woke up to the sound of my backpack zipper being pulled open right outside the tent wall. Then I heard hands moving through my stuff. Not clawing, not rustling like an animal. Whoever it was stepped around, and I heard the soft crunch of boots in the wet ground circling the tent. We had picked this remote spot in the national forest on purpose. I am 24. Marcus is 26. We both do IT, and we were sick of our screens and emails and fake emergencies. He was right about the no people part. We were miles off the main road, just a small clearing near a stream. No bathrooms, no signs, nothing. The footsteps did one full loop and stopped right at the entrance. I heard fingers test the tent door zipper, that tiny metal rattle as it caught. Then it started sliding down, very slowly, like whoever was out there did not want us to hear it. I fumbled the switch once, finally got it on, then snapped it straight at the door and held it there. Whoever was outside took off instantly. Marcus shot upright and grabbed my arm, asking what the hell I was doing and why the light was on. I told him someone had been unzipping our bags and trying the tent door. He kept whispering, "You sure it was not a raccoon?" And I kept saying, "Raccoons do not wear boots." We argued in low voices for maybe a minute before we both just shut up, pulled our backpacks inside, and shoved them against the entrance. Neither of us slept after that. Earlier that day, everything had felt completely normal. Me and Marcus had decided on this 3-day camping trip about a month before, 4 hours north of the office. He did the research and found this site way off the main road, still marked as dispersed camping allowed, on some old forum thread. We got there around 5 on Friday. We set up the tent, hung the bear bag, boiled some water, did the usual checklist. The only other sign of people was a white sedan parked maybe 100 yards away through the trees. We figured whoever owned it was on a day hike or backpacking further in. We made dinner, had a couple beers by the fire, and talked about work drama and how both of us kept threatening to quit, but never did. We finally crashed around 11. When it finally got light enough to see shapes clearly, we moved the packs and eased the tent door open. The ground was soft from recent rain, and there were boot prints everywhere around our tent. Marcus went to check the bear bag while I looked through our stuff. Every pocket on both backpacks was unzipped, even the little top one where I keep my car keys. Nothing was missing. Everything had just been opened and left. I looked over, and Marcus was just standing there under the tree, staring at me. He just pointed past me and said, "Dude, look." The white sedan was still at the other campsite. In the daylight, we could see it clearly through the trees. On the driver's side door was a magnetic sign that read, "Forest Security Patrol," with an official-looking logo I did not recognize from any park site I had ever been on. Marcus said maybe they were just checking on campers, doing some kind of security sweep, and that we had scared them off when I hit the light. I wanted to believe him, but I kept thinking about the way that zipper had eased down, slow and careful, and our bags being opened one pocket at a time. I could not shake the feeling that real security would not go through our stuff in the middle of the night without identifying themselves. We walked over to the sedan to talk to whoever owned it. Daylight felt safer. We stayed in the open and called out, "Hello." As we got close, we saw the driver's seat was empty. The car was locked, windows up, no movement. On the back seat was a dark uniform jacket and a handheld radio. That was it. No tent, no cooler, no gear. Just a car in the trees with a Forest Security Patrol magnet on the door. Marcus said it felt wrong, and I pulled out my phone. I had enough signal to Google the ranger station number. When the dispatcher answered, I gave our location and told her someone had opened our tent and gone through our bags. She asked if we'd seen the person or any weapon. Then I said, "There's a white sedan here that says Forest Security Patrol on it. Is that one of yours?" She went quiet, then asked me to read the sign and describe the car. I read it to her and mentioned the jacket and radio. Her voice changed. She said they did not have any vehicles labeled Forest Security Patrol, and nobody should be checking campsites at night without announcing themselves. Then she told us to leave that area immediately and said real rangers were on the way. Then we heard an engine down the road. We turned. The white sedan backed out of the trees and pulled onto the dirt road. The driver never looked at us, just drove off. I tried to see their face or get a picture, but the car turned a bend and disappeared before I could do anything. 40 minutes later, 2 rangers showed up in a park service truck. They parked in view, stepped out, introduced themselves by name, and said they'd been sent by the dispatcher. That alone made the fake car feel a lot more serious. We brought them to the tent and showed the boot prints in the ground and all the unzipped pockets on our packs. One ranger took photos while the other wrote everything down and had us walk through the timeline. When he asked if either of us had gotten the sedan's license plate, we both had to say no. He didn't say much, but you could tell he wanted that plate. One of them said this was the 3rd report that month of someone posing as forest security and going through campers' belongings. He said they figured the person was looking for cash, electronics, or keys, so they could come back later and take the car. The other ranger asked if we had anything valuable in the packs. Marcus suddenly remembered his wallet had been in an outer pocket all night with about $200 in it. We checked. The wallet was still there, cash and cards untouched. That bothered me more than if the money had been gone. It meant whoever had stood inches from our heads, opening every pocket, had taken their time and then walked away without touching the easiest thing to steal. The rangers didn't have an answer. They just repeated that leaving now was the right move. We packed up and drove home that day instead of finishing the weekend. The drive back was quiet. For the next week, I kept hearing Slow Zipper in my head and picturing the white sedan rolling away. When I finally checked the local news site for an update, there was an article about several reports of a fake forest security vehicle approaching campers, and it said the person hadn't been caught. During the summer of 2023, me and 3 friends, Jessica, Tom, and Ryan, were on day 2 of a 3-day backpacking trip on the Appalachian Trail. We had set up a base camp near a stream and planned to summit Mount Rogers with light day packs, leaving most of our gear behind. I'm usually the planner, so I had double-checked the map, checked weather, checked everything. The morning had been completely normal. Coffee, oatmeal, people complaining about sore shoulders. Around noon, we were stuffing snacks and layers into packs when a solo hiker walked into camp, unshaven, mid-40s, heavy pack, asking if he could join our fire for lunch. I told him we were actually about to leave for the summit and would not be around long. He nodded, then pulled a metal flask from his pocket and shook it. He said, "How about a little whiskey first, for courage and luck?" Tom laughed and answered for all of us that we did not drink while hiking. The guy's face went dark, his jaw clenched, and he muttered that we were too good for regular folks before turning back to the trail. Jessica whispered that he seemed off while we kept packing our things. We finished loading our day packs, left the tent standing, big packs on bear lines, food sealed in canisters, and headed out. The hike itself was fine. It took about 5 hours round trip, with a bunch of photo stops and a quick snack at the summit. We passed other hikers, a couple with a dog, some older section hikers, a trail runner, but not the whiskey guy. By the time we turned back toward camp around 6 in the evening, I had almost forgotten about him. Then we stepped into our clearing and everything felt wrong. The bear lines were on the ground, cut clean through, and our big packs were lying in the dirt with every zipper open and gear dumped out. Ryan swore and ran to his pack. Long slashes had been carved across the back panel and shoulder straps. Straight lines like a knife or razor had done them. Tom checked his and found the same thing. Mine and Jessica's packs were uncut. but every pocket had been emptied. Our food was everywhere. Trail mix bags were torn open and stomped into the mud, ramen and oatmeal scattered. Even the canned stuff opened and poured out on the ground. One pot was dented like it had been kicked around. My main first aid kit lay open and completely empty. I walked a slow circle around the site, trying to see some sign of an animal. There were no claw marks on the trees, no teeth marks on the canisters, no tracks except our own boot prints. This was not a bear or raccoon. This was clearly done by a person. Tom finally said what we were all thinking. That guy with the whiskey. This was him. Nobody argued. My anger hit hard, but underneath it was this sick feeling that we were suddenly very small out there, with our food ruined and our gear cut up for no good reason. Ryan, who was usually the calm one, immediately said we should go find the guy. He wanted to follow the trail back, maybe catch up and at least get the first aid stuff back. Jessica stepped in front of him and put a hand on his chest. She asked what exactly he planned to do if we found the man. Were we going to walk into some stranger's camp and start accusing him with no proof? What if he had a gun or a knife? What if he was waiting to see how we reacted before doing something worse? That stopped Ryan. My hands shook as I dug my satellite phone out of pack and called the park rangers. I told them what happened, described man, our location, and damage to gear. They said they would send someone, but it could be a couple of hours, and told us to stay put. While we waited, I noticed the clothesline, tarp lines, and gear cord cut into foot-long pieces beside the fire ring, and that methodical destruction felt worse than random vandalism. About 40 minutes after I hung up with the ranger station, we heard footsteps on the trail, and two men in uniforms came into our campsite. The older one asked if we were the group who'd called about a vandalized camp. Tom said yes and pointed around. They walked the perimeter slowly. The younger ranger took out his phone and started taking pictures of the cut bear lines, the rope on the ground, the trashed packs and food. The older one asked us to explain the day from the start. I told him when we'd left for the summit and when we'd come back, then described the solo guy with the flask, what he'd said when he showed up, how he'd gone quiet when Tom turned down the whiskey. Jessica added the too good for regular folk comment, and Ryan said we hadn't raised our voices or anything. The gray-haired ranger asked if there had been any argument, or if we'd told the man to leave. We all said no. He wrote everything down and asked what direction the guy had come from and which way he'd gone. We told him we hadn't seen him again. When they were done talking to us, the younger ranger crouched by one rope end. He said it was a clean knife cut, not torn, and pointed out there were no signs of animals. Hearing him say, "Definitely not wildlife," out loud made it sink in. The older ranger said that without witnesses or cameras, there wasn't much they could do besides document it and keep an eye out for someone matching that description, and that he'd radio it in. Then he suggested we end the trip a day early. Our ropes were basic safety gear, the packs were damaged, and we were already shaken. Hiking out while it was still light made more sense than spending another night worrying. None of us argued. We repacked what we could salvage. Every time I bent down to grab something, I caught myself glancing at the trees, imagining that guy standing there earlier, taking his time cutting straps and dumping food. We loaded the damaged packs as best we could, tying broken straps together with those short rope pieces. It felt unstable but good enough. The rangers said they'd do one more sweep and then head out themselves. We thanked them and left. The hike back to the trailhead was quiet. Every snap of a branch made all of us look up fast, but we didn't see the man with the flask or anyone who looked like him. When the car finally came into view, I felt more relieved than I wanted to admit for a trip that had been pitched as super easy and low risk. Getting everything fixed cost us close to $1,000, and insurance wouldn't cover it because it was vandalism, not theft. I kept replaying that short interaction, how we just politely said no to drinking with a stranger before a hike, and somehow that was enough for him to come back and spend real time in our camp, cutting every rope into short lengths, slashing 2 packs, dumping our food and emptying my first aid kit. That cold, methodical anger scared me more than if he'd just smashed things in a tantrum, and now whenever we go backpacking I insist someone stays at camp during day hikes, and we split our food and first aid between packs, because I can't shake how fast a normal weekend turned into this after one unstable stranger took no thanks as an insult.